I am Mark Smithies, Country Head of the Pharmaceutical Business Unit for Alcon Canada. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our lunchtime keynote speaker, but as sponsor, allow me to touch base on two things first. One is to let you know how delighted I am to sponsor, and let me very briefly say, for those of you who are not familiar with Alcon, that we are a team of approximately 24,000 associates worldwide that every day are working to be the most trusted leader in eye care, and every day to develop innovative products that enhance the quality of life by helping people see better. The second thing I wanted to mention was that I am on the board of Life Sciences Ontario and have been for some time. And so I've had an inside view of the growth of this organization. And under Jason's leadership, I have seen this organization grow in size, grow in influence, grow in relevance as the champion of the life sciences sector and fostering its commercial success. So my message to those of you who are in the room but are not members, you need to become members. Dr. Harvey Schipper is both an engineer and a physician who has combined disciplines to bring innovation to the health and life sciences sector, from the research bench to the bedside to public policy. His career has bridged 5 continents as a cancer specialist, innovator, health systems designer, businessman, and advisor to government, academia, and the corporate sector. As a physician, he was professor of medicine and director of the Regional Cancer Care System in Manitoba, and established the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Quality of Life Research in Cancer, which catalyzed patient-centered outcome research on a global basis. He's helped design cancer programs around the world and served as corporate vice president of MDS in a strategic portfolio. He is currently professor of medicine and an adjunct professor of law at the University of Toronto. His broad experience covers more than 35 years and includes involvement in venture capital allocation, startups, and establishing ventures. He has worked with governments and large health systems and has a long-standing interest in the interface of medicine, law, and public policy. He has played here a substantive role in critical issues. And this morning, Dr. Schipper will share with us his thoughts on the building of a commercially viable life sciences sector. Dr. Schipper, welcome.
Thanks, Mark, and thank you all also to Jeff Graham and Jason for inviting me. It's always a pleasure and a bit of a distraction to come into BLG, because if you look around the walls, and fortunately they're not set up or you'd be distracted as I would be, they have one of the most extraordinary photography collections going. And a number of occasions I've come in for a meeting and stared at an Irving pen across the room and had to pull myself back into the meeting. So fortunately the pictures aren't up today, or at least I haven't seen them, but you may want to wander through. What I would like to do over the next 15 or 20 minutes is extend to you something of a vision. As I've surveyed this health scene for a long time from a number of perspectives, I've been fascinated in this country to notice how we've managed to utilitize it, fractionate it, depress interest in it, because somehow or other we've sort of lost sight of the grand picture. And the grand picture is that it's about a health economy. It's not about the healthcare system over here, and it's not about health innovation over there. And they're never connecting and confronting one another because they seem to have different perspectives. But it's really about creating a health economy. And when I sit down with business people, political leaders, people in other countries like Singapore who've understood this for a long time, they say, you know, it's not about the 10% we consider a sunk cost in the healthcare system, but rather it's about the 15 or 18% that represents the health economy, the creation, the high quality jobs, the integration of the innovation to make the delivery part for our community better. So the first real message I want to leave with you is when you think about what we're all doing now, it's not about health innovation, it's not about health care, it's about building a health economy. And it's about building an economy that's timely because we're really at the cutting edge now. We're into the health and life sciences biology revolution. And it's a revolution which will have as much impact as any of the great ones in the past, the agricultural revolution, the steam engine, and a whole bunch of things like that, which I'll speak to in a moment. So that's the first thought I want to leave you with. And the second is this one. I want you to think about a pill bottle. And this is something I learned in my days with WHO. If we don't invent anything new, not a new drug, not a new device, and we simply are able to deliver what we know now in most any country in the world, including Canada, you can cut morbidity and mortality by half. And that's the basis of extraordinary opportunity. So what about this global revolution? Well, like all of the other ones, it's going to transform society. We're not going to be the same place in 25 years. And it also stands to realign global power and economic relationships. So let's look at some past examples. What about the agricultural revolution several thousand years ago? The people who discovered using technology, and they're all driven by technology, that instead of being nomadic, we could find ways to settle, to grow crops, to build cities. You built a civilization, Tigris and Euphrates area, that transformed the world for its time because they understood that there's a new technology that provides opportunity, provides a vision for their society, and transformed it, and of course they became the world leaders. Jump forward many hundreds of years to the invention of the steam engine. That was viewed as an expensive oddity. You should read the parliamentary discussions about, wow, build tracks? All right? But in fact, the people who embraced that and understood that that was going to form the basis of a whole economic, social, and political transformation really found that that was the sustaining basis of the British Empire. Come the Second World War, the game was changing. And the United States, having entered that war, having looked around, said, the model we're currently using, science over here, universities over there, government over here, business over there, makes no sense. So someone who you should read about, Vannevar Bush, was the president of one of the Ivy League universities, and he became Roosevelt's advisor, and he said, hey, let's have a vision of a society that integrates all those parts of our community, brings the best of each, and in effect allowed the United States to win the war and become the global power it was, because it looked ahead and said, this is about the proper marshalling of technology. The private sector, the public sector, innovators, creators, the military. Some say it led to the military-industrial complex, and there are concerns about that, but the reality is that's why the United States is the economic power it is today. So what's the Canadian context? And we all feel we've been impeded by the Canada Health Act, that it's been, as my mentor, the late John Evans, said, the largest wet blanket around innovation that this country has. Well, it was the right thing at the right time, because at the end of the Second World War, Canada had come of age as an adult country. We had declared war on our own terms. We had sacrificed mightily We'd overcome all sorts of political division in order to do it. And we came out of that conflict as a country with pride, an adult vision of the world, and we said, you know what? There's a concept that's fundamentally important. How are we going to build the next society? How are we going to build a great Canada? And it was taking the concept that Bismarck generated to unify the Germanys a long time ago, namely pensions and old age security, and said, you know what, we're going to include health. Well, what was health in those days? It was the ability to see a doctor when you were sick and get into the hospital, right? They're all men, and they came, I was one of them, but I wasn't that old then, came with my little black bag, and I had a few little things in the black bag, and I held your hand, and I holistically took care of you, and the GDP cost was maybe 2 or 3%. And the principle we needed to establish with the Canada Health Act was a right of citizenship. That medical care when you were sick was a right of citizenship. And out of that political message, which is a powerfully important one, that we were ahead of most of the world on and our friends to the south haven't still figured out, we built the healthcare system we have. So what was it like then? Well, I'm going to tell a couple of personal stories, and you've got to be very careful with doctors, because if you get them going on case stories, you'll be here till dinner. But one of my favorite ones was when I was a resident at Mount Sinai Hospital in the 70s. I was called down to the Emerge one night, and I was asked to see a woman who was a very elegant woman, and she was clearly dying of her heart attack because, frankly, there was little we could do. And we strung up the IV, we gave her some morphine, and she said, "What's your name?" I said, "Dr. Schipper." And she looked at me with her fading eyes and said, "Are you married?" And I said, "No." And she said, with her last words, "Have I got a girl for you?" I married someone different because I never found out who that girl was. What happens today? Well, we put in a stent within 40 minutes if you're within geographic range. And as I'm learning working with people at Toronto Rehab, even if your cardiac function is such that you can barely pick up a spoon when you start, with appropriate, holistic, broad-based rehab, you can be back on a treadmill going for 40 minutes a day. The issue is access, the issue is delivery, and a lot of that innovation came from Canada. Or another case. Again, I was training at the Princess Margaret Hospital, and a gentleman came in with a very widespread melanoma. He was clearly dying, and we would transfuse him from time to time. And we transfused him mostly to make ourselves feel better, because he would lose that blood again. And everybody had decided, including the patient and the family, that we weren't going to do more the next time. But the resident who was on call that night missed the note. Gave him 3 units of blood. And after the second unit of blood, the patient said, "Something feels different." By 6 weeks later, there was no evidence of his melanoma. And I lost track of him after 4 or 5 years when he was back living a normal life. So we knew that there was a mechanism we had to discover. And strangely enough, the key elements of that were discovered in Canada. The T cell and stem cells. But we brought none of that economic benefit to Canada. Now, some months ago, Jimmy Carter was in exactly the same position and got one of the drugs that came out of T cells and B cells and immune stimulants, and he was rendered disease-free. So what was an accident that stimulated us and got us thinking and led us to innovate in a very powerful, creative way, which we couldn't bring to market ourselves, is now a whole class of drugs that's emerging. And we're paying, as Canadians, very heavily for them. So what's really changed behind that, biologically? Why are we at the cusp of a biologic revolution? Well, the first is that there's the most extraordinary shift in thinking about biology since the invention of the microscope. We no longer think anatomically. It's not about your kidney. It's not about your spleen. It's not about your brain. It's about subtle metabolic pathways and how you regulate them. And that is a huge, profound change. In my cancer field, it says we no longer run around trying to kill cancer cells. Instead, we treat them like teenagers, which you may want to kill at times. But really, you want to educate them. You want to regulate them. And that's the most powerful transformation in biologic thinking since the microscope. The other is a piece of data that's hugely powerful. And that is, on a number of studies, the projection is that 50% of kids born today are going to live to 100. And they're going to be healthy into their 90s. And that's not just in the G7, it's in other countries as well. The other thing that's happening is if you look at survival curves, and you've probably seen them, and they sort of go like this and then they slope down. And the word we use is in epidemiologic terms is we try and rectangularize them. You pull out that curve so that you reach the natural human lifespan, which people argue about might be 100 or 110. And for the first time in the past 25 years, the improvements in those survival curves don't come from public health measures. All of the improvements beforehand came from clean water and immunizations, which are extremely important. But it's things like that melanoma treatment and things like that treatment for people who've had heart attacks that are pulling out their survival curve. So suddenly you've got these very powerful forces that are coming to bear. We're for the first time really able to talk about not the treatment of sickness, but the preservation of health. So this isn't a healthcare system. We need a wellness economy. And that opens all sorts of possibilities. And Canada is in a very particularly good position to do it because we have the most diverse culturally, genetically, economically population in the world. And from that database and our new ability to manage data, we can actually define the outcomes and create them in ways that no other community in the world can do. Now, Canada suffers the curse of the big, safe nation. You know, here we are. We don't feel any sense of urgency about it. But I remember having a conversation one day when we worked in Singapore with Lee Kuan Yew, and he said, you know, I go to Canada all the time. My daughter is a diagnostic radiologist at Sick Kids. And, you know, I'm out here, and for my country, I feel a sense of peril. We're doing all this stuff. But you know what? If it gets bad, you guys are going to go into the woods, light a fire, and chop trees. Speaking to the kind of things all of us talk about. In a sense, in my days at MDS, working with Benny among others, I sort of learned that our vision of innovation and venture capital financing was we wanted venture returns with T-bill certainty. And you know what? If we're going to really be the leader, if we're going to really be highly innovative, if we're really going to translate our extraordinary skill at the creation of ideas level, at the basic science level, where dollar for dollar and population for population, we well outperform the United States, then we're going to have to think a little bit differently. We're going to have to be prepared to allow some failure. We're going to have to be prepared to be nimble, to be quick, and to pull the system together so that our innovators can connect with our healthcare system, that our finance people understand the terms and the structure, and we can make these kind of things go. And actually, we kind of need a vision. And that brings me back to the bottle. We need a narrative for health, and that is not the amelioration of sickness, but a fully lived life for each Canadian to 100. And if we bring our minds and our resources, yours, government, and others around that as the binding vision that says, that's what we're about as a country. That's our goal. That's our contribution. Then we're going to have an enormous impact, and we're going to have the energy and the political and public support to make the expenditures. And by the way, I don't think we need $1 more in the healthcare system. We just need to innovate it and use our money differently. So I want to go back to that WHO diagram, where, remember before I said, even if you never invented something, if you could deliver it, you could improve morbidity and mortality. Instead of pills in the bottle, it's information. It's diagnostic information. It is, in an information sense, the information that's in a pill. It's a set of instructions to a biochemical pathway in the body to do something different. So when you look at an opportunity, an investment, think about it from the standpoint, can I invent it? Can I deliver it? And the new curve at the top is, can I assess its effect, its outcome? And in each of those realms, the world is crying for solutions. And Canada is in an extraordinary position to build them. So let me give you some examples. Drug development. There's actually a working group that's coming together quietly in Canada to look at an entirely new frame of drug development, to take out some of the risk at the beginning, to get drugs to market earlier, to use our total population base to learn the long-term consequences of drugs, because they're going to have a longer term than the ones we had before. I'm going to speak in a little more detail about wall-less hospitals, and I'll have a little thought about health innovation clusters as well. But think about our global expertise using distance and robotic technologies, and how we can invest in wall-less hospitals where, in fact, we can deliver our expertise, our information at the right time and at the right place, not only in Toronto, but in Botswana, or in Meaford, or in Inuvik. We can actually do coronary bypass surgery robotically now. It's a bit mind-bending, but the fact of the matter is we can. And we should have no limits to the possibilities, but we need to foster them. Big data and analytics are transforming things. Now, I think they're a bit overblown, but just imagine if we can use Canada's provincial, or better yet, if we were ever able to integrate it, national database of our citizens' interaction with the healthcare system to understand the determinants of health and wellness, and use it as a database that will far surpass the concept of the clinical trial. And there's no technologic reason we can't do it. It's a question of political will. There are privacy and intellectual property schemes we can talk about. The professions are going to be transformed. There's a fascinating book that comes out of Oxford University where people, a father and son, looked at what's going to happen to the professions, and they were two lawyers initially, and said, you know what, with all of this data, the professions are going to become commoditized, and the special realm that doctors and lawyers and engineers are going to have, well, in this country, we can help shape what that new culture is going to be. And there's money to be made in that, and there's enormous global influence and opportunity in the same thing. And finally, I sit on the board of an insurance company, and you know what? That whole industry is now taking the lead in saying, what are the effectiveness of our interventions in health benefits? We're not going to just write the prescription for the diuretic anymore. We want to understand what the benefit is. We want to have an impact with what we do. We want to spend our plan holders and plan sponsors' money more effectively. And that's a very powerful economic asset and intellectual asset to have. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I intentionally pull them because they're old, and they're ones I happen to have had some experience of. I was in Manitoba for 3 years that turned to 21. My wife had some comments about that. But the challenge I was given was to find a way to deliver cancer care in rural Manitoba. And of course, it was a very hospital-based system. And people, half the population lived rurally. You couldn't get a cancer specialist to live out there. And half the population would have to come in, get their chemotherapy on windy, snowy Winnipeg roads at night, and puke their way home. This was not good healthcare. So we sat down and said, what's the problem? The problem is an information problem. And the problem is the focus is on the institution, and it's entirely on the hospital. So let's do it a different way and say the hospital now has no walls. And let's look at it from the standpoint of the individual patient, and how do we make that patient's life better? So we actually use technology and some pretty primitive stuff to allow general practitioners to give chemotherapy in community centers around Manitoba. And what did we learn after a period of time? One, the outcomes were better than when the professionals did it. We grew the skill set in the community. I discovered 17 years later, not having decided to look at the beginning, that the problem of turnover of physicians, which is manifest throughout that part of the world, in 17 years we had one physician leave. And he retired at age 75. Okay? We started a biotech company because we said, hey, we need technology to do this. We need information technology. And the company, which was called Optex 2000, was the most sophisticated cancer patient management software entity anywhere. And it was built in Manitoba, and it was ultimately bought out and taken out by Varian because, for the reasons you all talked about, we didn't have a market. But thinking about health, not from the standpoint of delivering health care, but bringing all of the sectors together, because we had private sector, the university, cancer center, government, we were able not only to deal with an important healthcare problem, we created an industry, and that office still operates in Manitoba, and it was world leading. And we also attracted attention and became the WHO's research center for quality of life in cancer. So these are the kinds of things you can do, and those are some of the first centers we set up in Manitoba. And then I wanted briefly to tell you about one other thing, and it so resonates with what Valerie and Natalie and Andrew said. If you look carefully at the bottom of that, you'll see this document was dated 2004. So I have a certain sense of being preserved in formaldehyde. A few of us got together, former Deputy Minister of Industry, Harry Swain, Henry Friesen, a couple of others, and said, we want to create an entity that's going to pull these parts together. And the proposal was to create something called Health Innovation Canada. And Health Innovation Canada would have the focus of bringing commercial and business knowledge forces into the health creation, the intellectual creation effort. And it had three mandates. The first mandate was to scour our major teaching hospitals for excess capacity. That could be human resource capacity, physical capacity, lab capacity, whatever it was, and in a sense factor them to industry that might be able to use that resource down the line to accelerate its growth. And there'd be financial returns to the hospitals to do it. The other, of course, was the inverse, and that was to say to the hospital, we're going to scour for innovation that you have that may need exactly the kind of commercial translation experience that you don't have the skill set for, and God bless you for not having it, because that's not what you do. And we're going to bring that to you. And third, we're going to take a page out of DARPA and go to the major institutions and say, what is the biggest problem you need to solve with new technology? And then we're going to put it out there for people to solve it, and they're going to have a market. And we coupled that with a $1 billion government fund that would be a passive investor beside private investors. They would not be the decider. All right? Government doesn't pick winners very well. So they'd be passive, and we'd try and level the pit. Well, that went before government. You saw the day 2004. We actually met with senior people, Peter Nicholson and others, and the dying days of the Liberal government, and plop. But one of the reasons for the plop was you'd go into a major teaching hospital and say, what do you think of this idea? And they said, well, it's a really very good idea, but one, I can't invest the $250,000 or $300,000 it's going to be to start it up because I'm going to have to take it out of the nursing budget. And not every one of these is going to succeed, and you know how we deal with failure here. I, the CEO, will wear it. And if it succeeds, you know what's going to happen? It's going to be taxed back 100% in the next block funding cycle. And that was the answer I got across the country. So finally, I want to give you a sense of the kind of policy things that may serve to change this. But the big one is, it's about creating a health economy. And it's about thinking about the pill bottle as a piece of it, as containing information that we have to invent, we have to get to the right place at the right time, and that we need to understand so that we can continue to invent. And the first is that health care and health innovation are parts of a national economy with a global perspective. And we treat it that way, as an innovative thing. We're prepared to address failure, and we're prepared to educate our community and lead it, saying, this is going to make all of us better. It's not about being sick, it's about being well. And it's about having the same kind of dynamic economy that got the agricultural and industrial and computer revolutions going. We have public and private sector involvement with accountability. It's change and innovation mandated and rewarded. And one of the other interesting ones is that we have real labor mobility. Have you ever tried to move a doctor from Toronto, from Ontario to Saskatchewan? Or, more painfully, shift job roles so that everybody does it better. But we're in this zero-sum game where if you decide to take a bit of my role, to give somebody else a bit of my role, that must be something real bad out of my pocket. We've got to change that because we can do so much better. So we have to really allow that kind of labor mobility. Patient-centered care, you know, if the dollar follows the outcome, you notice some cars sell better than others? It's okay with transparent data, with knowledge about how successful we are, to have outcomes generate more business. Now, the last thing we want most of the time in our healthcare system is more patients in a given hospital. Back to that curve over the bottle. The ability to collect, ask the right questions, and collect the data that helps us shape what exactly we're going to do. And the whole thing is outcome driven. What really happens? It's not process. It's not how many people you treat. It's not how many things you invent, because we're not always going to succeed. It's about what the outcome really is in terms that are important to those receiving the outcome. It's not the outcome that XYZ hospital met its budget. It's the outcome that when you or me or my family need to access the system, it meets our needs in ways that we can reflect on. A whole bunch of years ago, by accident, I had coffee with Mr. Justice Emmett Hall. I was a young resident. And he turned up in Winnipeg on another thing, and lo and behold, I was in this dismal cafeteria, and I really wasn't smart enough to understand what a moment this was going to be. And I should have taken notes. But what he said to me, remember, he was the father of Medicare in Canada. He said, I hope that we do not freeze our principles in legislation and bureaucracy such that we cannot adopt to a future none of us can imagine. Well, we're at that future now, and this country is in a unique position to do something about it. If instead of going in our fragmented ways, saying a little bit more of this, a little bit more of this, we sell the notion that this is an inflection point in history. It's an extraordinary transformation that's happening around the world. And we're in a position to lead that race for a whole bunch of reasons we can talk about for hours at end. Then the economic, social, and other possibilities are enormous. And as I look around this room and think about the people I've talked with about this over the months and years, I take huge faith in the next generation. Guys with hair my color don't mostly get it. My kids do. People in this room do. It's not about just preserving where we are. It's not about being more cost efficient. It's about being exciting, about being transforming. Of just as the Americans once upon a time said, they're going to go to the moon. We can do this. And it's not way out there technology. This is using what we've got now. And as I look across this room, you guys are the catalysts, so go to it.
Sure. We got time for maybe one or two quick questions. Somebody? Natalie.
Natalie.
So, obviously it's inspiring to hear you speak, but it's also terrifying.
Yeah.
So you put the slide up of that proposal that you tried to sell.
Okay.
And when you were selling that, were you who were you speaking on behalf of, and how? Like, I think we're in this moment in time as well of trying to help people to understand what the possibilities are, and what would be your advice to us to really try and make inroads in where it would have been harder for you to do when you did it?
Well, I think there's several things in play. Firstly, there weren't as many interested parties at the time. This was 2004. You know, as Mr. Trudeau said, it's now 2016. There are more partners that you can draw around the table. So what I'd be saying is you should be sitting down with a whole bunch of people selling a unified vision. It's not just Life Sciences Ontario's, it's not Cancer Care Ontario's. It's saying, here's the unifying vision under which we can all march. The other thing that's changed is I think people are perceiving the reality of the change in our understanding of biology and how it's having an impact. And on the one hand, it's exciting, and to quote you, on the other hand, it's terrifying. So if we can play a role in harness the excitement and somewhat relieving the terror, then I think we're in a very powerful position. I mean, I've sat down with senior political leaders, and I've said, what about this idea? They said, it's a terrific idea. Can you get everybody around the table to go around it? Well, here we are. Let's go. Yeah. They're looking for something. You know, the notion in the current discussions around the health accord of, we're going to give you more money without any questions asked. You know how it's going. The real answer should be, no, we're not. But we're going to give you money for transformation purposes, for transforming the system, for doing new things, if you're going to assess it. But we're not going to give you a single sou in order to pay a doctor another $50 or whatever the heck it is. We don't need more money. And if you look across the history of innovations as a whole, this is a mature technology. And the old minds keep pouring more and more money into fine-tuning the mature technology when the disruptor comes up cheap and says, hey, here's a better way to do it. And I think the things like federal expenditures are the kind of disruptive things. And it's kind of interesting. One of my friends has been talking with a number of the venture funds about social welfare bonds for around transformation. In other words, will the pension funds, with their much longer horizons, than many funds, be prepared to market a bond that would in fact be mitigated against objective measures of success and would pay out on that basis? And what I'm told is that the answer is, how much do you need? And people say $5-7 million, and the answer comes back, well, that's almost too small for us to consider. So it's all this kind of stuff, but you've got to have a vision, and there are all sorts of bits and pieces you can pull together. And it's true you're going to want all sorts of experiments around the edge, because after all, that's what the thing in Manitoba was. But the reality is, if you come together and say, that's the hill I want to climb, and you keep at it, step at a time, not losing sight of the hill, the same way all those other revolutions happened, it'll happen here.
Thank you, Dr. Schipper. We're out of time, so please join me in thanking Dr. Schipper. That was a fabulous talk. Thank you. Just a quick comment. That was a wonderful call to action, I think, for all of us. And we've heard this in our panel discussions today, the importance of having that aligned vision and that unified voice to move a strategy forward. And I think that that's something that, that LSO has continued to champion for some time, working closely with our partners at all levels, whether it's Biotech Canada, other provincial associations, regional governments, provincial governments, and the federal government. But we do need the entire community to rally behind it. And I think that's part of the discussion today, is to find out how we can make that happen. So I want to thank you again, Dr. Schipper. That was wonderful. Thank you all for joining us for the morning session. We are going to break for lunch now. Lunch is a buffet lunch. They're opening up the doors right now, very dramatically unveiling lunch. I know you're all hungry, so we're going to pause here, and then we will pick up just before 1 o'clock. Thank you very much.